Hi there, I'm April Callis-Birchmeier. I'm a certified change management professional and project management professional, and welcome to LinkedIn Live. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about tackling the hard side of change. I think one of the frustrating things for many of us who are change management practitioners or who are project management professionals or in the human resources side of the world is just the difficulty of dealing with people who must change because it's so frustrating to not be able to do more to help people. So, as if you've been watching any of my videos, or if you've been participating in the courses that I teach, you will know that my goal is to really help people, individuals, be prepared for change so that they can have a simpler time, an easier time in adopting that change. I'm so invested in the fact that we need to help people get ready for change, that I actually named my framework the Ready Framework, so that we can ensure that people really know what's happening. Because the hard side of change is all of the mindset shift and the changes that many people experience. So we'll be talking a little bit about what makes change itself hard and difficult. I mean, it just is for humans. And also how to deal with some of the resistance that we might see when we know we have people who are really struggling with change. We're also going to be talking a little bit about how to mitigate some of that resistance when we're implementing some sort of a change. And then we'll also think about what happens if that resistance is sort of embedded in the culture of that organization. That happens sometimes, and it is not a necessarily easy fix, I must say. And then we'll talk a little bit about, how you can learn more about these topics and how I can be helpful to you thinking through various change that you may have to be dealing with. So let me just start out and talking a little bit about why change is so hard on people. I feel like this is um, the crux of the issue, basically. And, you know, people are emotional, and our emotions affect how we perceive the world, how we feel about the world. If you are having some positive emotions one day, things seem very possible. You're not very worried about a change. If you're having less than positive emotions, you might be feeling stressed and somewhat down in the dumps, and maybe even frustrated and like you want to give up on the whole thing. And I know that this happens frequently during change. There's just kind of a lot of emotion involved with the mindset shifts that have to happen. And I think many times we have to recognize that change feels hard because people like stability. We like our sense of stability. We like our sense of comfort and our continuous routines. And we like to have control over our own lives. And many times in a change, one of the things that really happens is that we don't feel that sense of control. We don't have that sense of stability. And we know something's coming that's going to require a lot of adoption, a lot of adaptation of our habits and our norms and our routines. So I think one of the biggest pieces to this hard side of change is just fear of the unknown. And fear is a very powerful emotion. We know fear is like one of the most powerful emotions because if you think about, for example, advertising, many times they are directly appealing to fear. I remember an insurance company ad, it didn't have any words at all. All they did have was a house burning down. They had firemen putting water on the house. All you could hear were the radio and the 911 call, and it just was the insurance underneath showing, that that would be something that would help you during this big fear that many of us have, that we might lose our home, might lose our belongings and our family members and our pets. It's a terrifying fear. And that fear is very motivating. So when you show me that fear and then you tell me this insurance company cannot mitigate that fear, it's very, very powerful. And so we know that whenever we have this change in the status quo, or we're not sure of what the outcome might be, and we don't know how things are going to turn out necessarily, it just creates a lot of anxiety for people. And that anxiety, that fear, that anxiousness is really difficult sometimes to emotionally accommodate. And you know, although we many times say we don't want boring, we honestly kind of do. We like predictability. We like things to stay the same, which really brings me to that second piece. Another piece of like where this difficulty, where this challenges of adopting change, and that is the loss of control. Now, many of us who are adults like feeling in control. We like to pretend we're in control of everything. I like to ensure that we have enough food, that I've done shopping, that I have transportation, that I've got shelter and a home. I'm thinking about many, many different ways that I practice control in my environment. And then somebody implements a change or imposes a change on me, and I feel like I've lost this control. I I know that at times I've been told this is how something's going to be, and it's a change, and that loss of control, that sense of like, "Hey, I'm very, very, powerless in this situation," really kicks up my resistance because I want to resist this situation. I want to reclaim my control. I'm in charge. And yet, many times we are not. And so, this loss of control is one of those areas where we can see a lot of resistance. In fact, in my teaching, I often work with a case study written about a school district. And one of the biggest issues for that district is the fact that many of the stakeholders are experiencing a tremendous loss of control and so are very much against the change and finding it very hard to be supportive of this change. Another reason why people start to feel really dug in, perhaps, resistant with change is just that we like our routines. You know, we all have specific routines that we do even when we don't have a routine, we sort of have a routine. But I like to get up and do things in a certain order. I may have coffee, or maybe I go work out first and then have some coffee. I like to think about my day before I jump into it. You probably have a lot of different routines that you like as well. Some people love to have specific routines when they get home from work, if they work on site somewhere, or maybe a routine to sort of disconnect from work if you're working from home. But we're creatures of habit. We do like routines, and when we have to break our established routine, this can feel very overwhelming. James Clear has a fantastic book called Atomic Habits, and I would highly recommend that you read it. And one of the important pieces that James talks about in Atomic Habits is this understanding that the habit makes our lives so much simpler. So of course, if we have to break our habit, if we have to break our routine, our lives instantly are more complex and complicated. And that can absolutely feel overwhelming and kick up that sense of resistance that I have around change because I don't want to necessarily have to break my habit or change the way I do things in my routine. I like the routines I have the way that I have them. Another purpose or another piece where I think change gets hard many times is that there, as I mentioned early on, we were talking about emotional investment, right? That many times we have a lot wrapped up into our role at work or the way that we function in society. Um, we have our identities kind of tied to what we do and who we are and the relationships we have with others. And so when there's a change, we can feel like we're really losing a part of ourself, that we're, emotionally kind of taking that deep dive. If you think about that change curve and about the change curve, diving down in terms of performance dipping whenever we experience change, this is that piece. I think that's the emotional investment, the emotional cost of going through change. It's difficult when we have to disconnect from people that we care about, when we have to maybe change employers, change homes, change states. Um, all of those things can be emotionally draining and exhausting because we have an emotional investment in the home, the relationships, the job, the work, all of the things that we currently enjoy as a part of our life. I think change can also impact our cognitive abilities, our ability to think clearly. When I have a lot of change going on, it's almost that I feel like I have a little bit of amnesia, like I can't quite keep everything in my brain anymore. I've got sort of this cognitive overload of having to learn new behaviors and new systems. And sometimes there's even that moment of like, well, wait a minute, why am I staring at my computer? I can't quite remember how I'm supposed to even log into the new system. And this can be very mentally taxing to have to learn a lot of new information, new process pieces. And I think part of it depends on how quickly we have to make this cognitive shift. And I think a lot of it depends on how much there is to learn and how complex it is to learn. When I'm thinking about my change management assessments, one of the important assessments I always look at first is the change impact assessment. And the change impact assessment is some looking at a number of different factors that are helping me to measure the complexity, the cognitive load, if you will, of this change. And so when we have a lot of change, our brain overextends itself sometimes. Our brain might resist remembering, or we may find that we can't quite focus on all of the tasks that we need to do because they're unfamiliar. We're not able to rely on our habits, and we're using so much mental energy to adopt and adapt to this new environment, this new world. I think social pressures are very difficult. Um, Again, with change, the social relationships that we have, the social pressures we have, many times there's a sense that we could be judged if we're not doing well with a new system or a training or maybe even a process um, redesign. Maybe we've just restructured our organization, and I feel like I might be judged if I'm not fast enough, quick enough, if I don't understand it deeply enough. I also don't want to be considered not with it, that I am not with it, or that I'm being resistant. So there's this social pressure of feeling like I may not live up to someone's expectations. Maybe I'm not living up to my leader's expectations, or maybe I'm not living up to my project team expectations because I am suffering from this fear of judgment that sometimes comes along with learning something new and having to fit into a new world. I think there's a fear of failure in many cases that is very emotional for people. When we're fearful, as I said, when we're talking about fear is the number one motivator, when we're fearful, it can absolutely kind of prevent us from stepping forward in confidence. We don't have confidence when we're fearful. We are suffering, and we're thinking about the possibility that we could fail at something, and it can create a lot of pressure and a lot of avoidance, honestly, because I am thinking about how is it that I can ensure that I don't fail. I'm going to try to take the tiniest bite I can, and I'm going to try to make it look as good as I can. And there's just a lot of fear in this sort of place. And that's where I tend to get really resistant. It's like, I don't want anyone to see my fear. and I don't want to fail. I want it to all look good, even if it's not good. You know, I mean, this probably doesn't come as a surprise to you, but I've been on projects where somebody tried so hard to show that they were with it, that they had not failed, that they what they were doing was maintaining their former database, maybe an Excel spreadsheet, and maintaining that former tool that they had previously used, and then taking the output and putting it into the new system instead of having the new system actually capture all of the information. And it's really comes back to that fear of failure. I think many times people are fearful of failure because they've had negative past experiences. When we have had a negative past experience with a change or with any sort of overwhelming sense of loss of control, it can definitely shape our perceptions and make us feel as though we're anticipating that that could happen again. When I'm doing an organizational change readiness assessment, one of the things that I often look for, and I'm thinking about external factors related to the change, I'm also thinking about internal and historical factors related to the change. I want to consider uh, has this organization failed at change previously? Because that can leave scars in the organization, like psychic scars on the people who have stuck around and maybe had to reverse a change or roll something back, had to move in a different way. It can be really frustrating and very fear inducing and very make people very anxious about being judged for their progress or lack of progress in a change. And then finally, I think, there's the biological response of change, right? Like our brains perceive change as a threat. Many times I think I've seen people say, "Well, the Japanese symbol for threat also means opportunity," which yes, but I think our brains do perceive change as threat, and it activates a stress response. We dump a lot of cortisol, which is that stress hormone, into our system. Many times we can feel like we've got a shot of adrenaline because we're actually very, very fearful, very anxious about the change. So this is an instinctive reaction, and I think that this is one of those areas where we don't have a whole lot of control over our biological response to change. You know, People do have biological responses to emotions, to threats, to what we see as a danger. And there's this fight or flight or freeze response that happens many times. The flight response is that we're going to just run and get away and get out of there. The fight response is that we're going to fight with the danger. We're going to resist. We're going to really have it out. And then the freeze is just that frozenness, where we're not fleeing, we're not fighting, we're just frozen. And whenever we have these stress responses, it can be exhausting to us. Even if we're having a small flight or fight or freeze experience in the daytime every single day, it can leave us exhausted. So it's really difficult to recognize that, you know, ch- tackling the hard side of change means not only are we tackling some of the structural pieces of an organizational change, like, do we have different people in different roles? What do those roles and responsibilities look like? Are people having to change locations or relationships? And there's a lot of structural pieces. If we're reorganizing, perhaps, do people have different reporting structures? I'm concerned. Do I have a job still? There's a lot of stress with those bigger pieces, but there's so much stress internally, mentally, and emotionally within individuals. And so the organizational change piece, we're going through that organizational change of looking at structure and framework and process, system, and then we have all of this internal stakeholder, emotional mindset shift that is sometimes even causing physical responses. And I think it's important to recognize that these physical responses, they're they can be very upsetting when we're not sure why we're feeling so terrible, why we are so upset. So I think there's a couple of things that we can do to mitigate change, resistance, this sensation. I think trying to share with stakeholders how they are safe in this change, trying to build safety into the change for them is really essential because if we can help our stakeholders feel safe, then they don't start with the immediate fearfulness of I'm overwhelmed, I'm out of control. So providing some safety. Now, there's a few ways we can do that. One way I like to provide safety is I like to talk about what's not changing. I like to see if there's areas where I don't have to change something. Do we have to change all the terminology and all these processes? Well, maybe we could not change the terminology. Maybe we could have sort of a crosswalk, or maybe we could just call the new thing the same terminology that we previously called it, even though it's different. It reminds me of a project I worked on a while ago. It was called it had been called single sign-on, and I'm sure that if you're on this LinkedIn Live, you've probably experienced a single sign-on system where you sign on one time and you have access to all of your applications, all of your tools that you need to use for work. You know, many of us do this on a daily basis. We were going to be replacing this single sign-on system, and I honestly felt that we should just call the new system single sign-on. We should call it the same thing. The technical team really was very interested in calling it credentialing and access management, and they wanted to use the acronym of CAM, C-A-M. They wanted to call it the CAM system. So instead of SSO, it would be CAM. Now, I did challenge them, and I think that's our role when we're a change management professional sometimes is to challenge language and challenge thinking. And I did challenge this group. I said, "Tell me exactly why I can't call this CAM system the SSO." And they said, "Because that's a single sign-on where you get to access all of your systems once you sign on. And this is credentialing and access management. And you'll still get to access all of your systems once you sign on, but it's different." And this is where I started to get frustrated because I thought, it's different to you because you're a technical user and you have a different technical architecture for this particular solution. But it's not different to the people who use the tool day in and day out. It's the same SSO. And so we did have quite a discussion. We ended up with a completely different name, and that different name has stuck and seems to be the right terminology. It was easy for people to adopt because it was called login. It was just instead of saying SSO, single sign-on, we just called it login. And everybody goes to log into their system. But we didn't call it CAM because CAM does not sound like something you use to log in. CAM sounds like a part of a car or it sounds like a camera. So we want to make it simpler and easier for our end users, our stakeholders to be able to adopt something because it doesn't sound scary and horrible. It sounds familiar. We've used the same term to do the same type of thing. Even if in the back, the technical team calls it something different or the vendor team calls it something different, we want to use the stakeholder friendly language because that helps people not be fearful, overwhelmed, or feel like they've lost something when we call the new what the old was called. I think there's also, so there's that emotional piece. I think asking people to visualize themselves in that future state by going through a business process review where we spend the time to kind of walk through in a bit of a what could be seen as step by step, kind of a painful process, step by step analysis where we're looking to see, are there places where the business process needs to change in order to accommodate this technical change? And many times there are places where that business process needs to change. But if the people who are going to be experiencing that business process change are those who are designing that business process change, it makes it much simpler for them because they don't have to feel as though they are, you know, out of control, like they don't have any say in what something is. It can help a great deal with sort of establishing a new routine, right? These are not the old habits, but we can start to replace old habits with some new comfort, new routines. And I think also people get emotionally invested in facilitated conversations that they have a part in, such as a process redesign session or a transition workshop, which is many times what I call these events. And I also want to think about, you know, some cultures, some organizations have a culture of resistance where, you it feels like people resist anything that's suggested. And if you say, the sky is green, they say, no, it's blue. And if you said, oh, yeah, you're right, it's blue, they say, no, it's green. So there's just this kind of gut reaction resistance that can come up. And to mitigate some of that, I think it's important to identify it and call it what it is, and say, "Oh, it sounds like there's some disagreement, some resistance, some frustration here." I think also it's important to leverage social pressure by building a change agent network or liaison group that can be connected to the change and positively focusing on what they can do to help people in their business unit adapt the change more easily. And then they can take the information from the business unit and share it back with the change initiative or with the project team. And so that dual role can actually help people who are resistant to feel more heard and more connected and to reduce some of that cognitive overload because they don't have to remember everything. And it can also help the people who are in that role who may or may not have been somewhat organizationally resistant to start to change their perspective and maybe even become less resistant. Maybe it helps heal some of the scars of negative past experiences where change didn't go so well. So those are some tactics and ideas on what can be very helpful in dealing with change when we're tackling this hard side of change, this fear and resistance, anxiety, the cognitive overload, the emotional response, and the biological responses to change. But, if you'd like to learn more, I would love to invite you to join us for the Ready, Set, Change accelerated training and exam prep course. Our courses are starting again in 2025, and the first one begins on February 24th, 2025. And so, if this is an area where you want to learn more and you'd love to have some tools and techniques and know what to do to help people through this resistance of change and how to make it through the hard side of change, we'd love to have you join us. So, please uh, feel free to Google Ready, Set, Change Accelerated Training and Exam Prep and reach out to me on LinkedIn, reach out to me through email. I'd love to have a meeting with you if you're interested in learning more about how to tackle the hard side of change. So I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Have a wonderful holiday if we don't see each other before then. And I appreciate your interest and your excitement and enthusiasm about change management I love helping people tackle the hard side of change. So take care.